Good afternoon and welcome to the House Committee on Environment and Energy. This afternoon, we are looking at S-112, an act relating to miscellaneous subjects related to the Public Utility Commission. And we're going to start our testimony with Kyle Landis-Marinella. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Kyle Landis-Marinella, General Counsel of the Vermont Public Utility Commission. So S-112 is what we've been referring to as our housekeeping bill, and it has a number of changes in it, and I'll go through by page number. I think that's probably easiest. And I'll mention the change and the reason for it. So on page 1, there's a reference to public hearings being remotely accessible or held in person. So right now there is some ambiguity over whether public hearings are allowed under section 248 of Title 30. So this is our general permitting section, for lack of a better term. So this would clarify we can hold remote hearings as we have been doing during COVID. And then on page 3, we're clarifying that there's an ability for utilities to waive a 120-day clock when they start a rate case. And so this happens not too often, but occasionally we do have a very complicated case that requires more than 120 days. And it's not entirely clear under the current language that those waivers are allowed. So we did want to clarify what is the current practice of allowing those waivers in that situation.
Yeah, hold on. Actually, I would just want to one minute. I was told you were not available. You were only available till 2. Is that true?
Oh, well, everybody's committee was
been delayed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ways and Means is going to try to fit me, but I are also about a half hour behind.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think it's okay to keep going with Kyle. We have a different perspective. I think it's fine. And then maybe we can also, if we have questions that are better for Ellen to answer, we can also get those answered. Representative Stebbins.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Cal, you had said 100-day requirement. This is a waiver, and you mentioned rate cases. I'm looking at this. Is that just an example? Would this only apply to rate cases, or would this apply to all?
So sorry, there are a couple places where the 120-day applies. So here on page 3, this is specific for a decision on a long-term gas contract. So we do think of that under the category of a rate case. And then there's a similar clarification later on this page. On pages 6 through 7, this is section 227. That's the general block for rate cases, and that's actually a 7-month block that starts there. So again, these are very definitive time periods in the statute, and the current practice, we have allowed waivers when the utility itself, the entity trying to get the rate changed, says it's okay if you take longer. But as general counsel, it always makes me nervous when the statute doesn't clearly state that that is allowed. And so this type of clarification would be helpful.
But again, this is just for rate cases. Or would it be more broad? Just curious, because I don't necessarily see that it's.
Yeah, I believe this is for long-term gas contracts and for rate cases where we have those.
Maybe it's
clocks.
5 feet. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And then page 4, we want to again clarify that the reference to corporations includes other entities like partnerships and LLCs. And this language is modeled off the definition of a company in section 201 of Title 30. And it clarifies also that a public service corporation includes other corporate entities besides a corporation. So I don't think that's anything new. It's just clarifying that those terms are that broad. And then on page 5.
Representative
Yes.
Pat.
Just one technical point. A cooperative is a corporation already, so.
Yes. No, I appreciate that. And it's, I think that, again, some of these changes that it's not clear that they're needed. Like I said, this is generally current practice, but it's kind of belt and suspenders. Page 5, this is another place clarifying that public hearings can be held remotely, and this is in section 506. And so I believe that's for cable television certificates. And same with the bottom of page 5. Again, I'll just clarifying remote hearings are allowed. And then on page 6, this is bringing the notice provisions into alignment with other notice provisions we have in Title 30. So the notice is provided in the website and in one newspaper rather than in 2. I think the language there is kind of based on a few decades ago when more people were getting their information from printed newspapers. So this brings it up to date and makes it consistent with other provisions of notice that we have. And then 6 and 7 is, again, this is a change in the making clear that the utility seeking the rate change can waive the 7-month requirement.
I have a question about the previous one, change. And I'm new to this area of statute, but do you have a procedure for having a list of interested parties that you would also be giving notice to?
We do informally have a list of, we kind of often refer to as a frequent flyer list, kind of all the utilities are on it, all of the regular participants in certain types, often citing cases or rate cases will be on it. And at last I knew, I think there are over 350 people that were on that list. Anyone who contacts our clerk's office can be added to that general list. That's not, so notice will go out when there's something major that we think affects a lot of stakeholders. So for instance, we redid our rules of procedure in the last couple of years. And when we started that process and at various points in the process, we blast out an email to everyone on that list to make sure they were aware that this was happening. But the notice provisions that are in statute tend to be more specific to these are the entities that legally have to get notice to go forward with any proceeding. Does that clarify it?
It does, and maybe I'm going to ask Ellen to just an orientation for the committee of this whole section of statute after you're finished. So maybe I'll get more information then.
Okay. So moving on to pages 7 through 11, there's are a number of changes in here, and they can be broadly summarized in those provisions as providing clear statutory authority that the commission can update our procedural rules. This is rule 2 that I just mentioned. We recently revamped the entirety of those rules, and then we can do it through order and through the process that the courts use to update their rules of civil procedure and other court rules. And so the reason this request is being made is that when we went through Rule 2, the old Rule 2 had a cross-reference to the Vermont Rules of Civil Procedure. And so those were incorporated by reference. So when the Vermont Supreme Court updated the rules of civil procedure, our rules were automatically updated in that they cross-referenced that rule. So it was whatever was the most up-to-date version. we heard from a number of stakeholders during the Rule 2 process that particularly pro se parties don't like having our rules and then separately having the rules of civil procedure. And in the last few years, we also had rules specific to electronic procedures for our electronic case filing system. So the biggest thing we did when we revamped Rule 2 is we combined all three of those documents into one. So now there's one document. It is longer than it used to be, but a lot shorter than when all the rules of civil procedure were added to it. But we have one document that encompasses all the rules of procedure. As we went through that process, we realized and a consequence of that is the rule that we put in our rules is kind of set in stone. And that rule went through the Administrative Procedure Act, through ALCAR, all of those steps. But we no longer get the rule automatically updated when the Vermont Supreme Court updates its rules of civil procedure. We need to take some sort of action to incorporate the new language. And so we worked on this provision, these changes here, to basically create a more streamlined way of updating our rules of procedure. It's only our rules of procedure. This doesn't apply to our net metering rules, our Section 248 rules on citing new projects, anything like that. It's purely our rules of procedure would have this more streamlined process where we're going before the Judicial Committee of Administrative Rulemaking. I think I got that name right. And they are going to see our updated rule, and they will have just approved the same thing through the Vermont Rules of Civil Procedure. And so that's creates some efficiencies also. You have the same entity reviewing the same types of rule changes.
Did you run this by the frequent flyers?
So this came up in the Rule 2 proceeding, and we did get feedback on some entities wanted us to have this ability to incorporate the most recent changes. There were some entities that wanted some checks in place, and I think this language does provide checks in place in terms of the review that entities would have if they have a challenge to if they're unhappy with any change to our procedural rules. We wouldn't be doing this on our own. The legislature can always overrule any change that we made, and the Legislative Committee on Judicial Rules would be open to feedback from any members of the public or any stakeholders if a particular rule were giving us some authority that people didn't want us to have. So there are still those checks in place with it. And I would say that we asked stakeholders kind of like, what do we do? Because if the alternative was not doing the main thing they wanted, which was bringing the rules of civil procedure directly into our document. And so I do think there's an understanding of practitioners who come in front of us that this is a compromise to allow us to have the rules all in one place, but also be able to keep them up to date. Because most of the rules the Vermont Supreme Court does, the updates that they make are really common sense changes that are broadly supported. And most people are going to want those to be incorporated into our rules.
Members have questions on this? Representative Stebbins.
Can you give an example of like most of the rules that are changed by the, this is end up being something that most people would want you to incorporate?
Yeah, so the Vermont Rules of Civil Procedure, despite being around 100 pages long, there's routinely things that come up that attorneys realize aren't really answered by the Rules of Civil Procedure. And so one thing I could think of off the top of my head is when is a reply due when one party moves for summary judgment? And the rule on summary judgment says, here's when this is filed and the other side has 30 days to respond and then doesn't see anything about replies. And so some lawyers would say, well, that means you don't get a reply. And then other lawyers say, well, no, there's a general rule on motions that says, and a reply is due this many days afterwards. And so something like that will kind of bounce back and forth in the courts for a while. And eventually it rises up to the Rules Committee and they look and they say, let's just put a reply date directly in the rule and summary judgment. And that'll happen. And so that's the type of routine change that occurs. There has been a lot more activity on updating the rules during COVID because as we did with our rules of procedure, everyone wants to make clear that what video conferencing is allowed and how that operates.
Fascinating.
I will say that having been on the Act 250 side of these conversations and hearing from people who participate in both, they do point to the PUC rules being more challenging for general public to participate in. And so that's one of the observations I share is the details of someone who's trying to participate without an attorney can be very challenging. Yes, Representative Stebbins.
So obviously, if you're an attorney or a frequent flyer intervener before the PUC, you might know about this, Committee on Judicial Rules, but if you're not, you probably wouldn't know that if you didn't like what a rule was, how to actually go to the PUC and say, I'd like to find out how I do this. Would you put this on your website? Like, if you don't like some of our rules, you can object to the Legislative Committee on Judicial Rules, or how would you communicate that? Or does someone just have to bump until they find the right answer?
Well, we have all of our rules up on our website, and that's probably the most frequently visited part of our website. Certainly if we were proposing a change to Rule 2, it would come up when someone clicked on Rule 2. Here's the current rule, here's the proposed change. I expect that we would also be putting this out to the list of frequent flyers when we're making a change like this. The last thing we want is it to catch someone off guard and have them raise an objection late in the process. And I'll also just add, Chair Sheldon, just because I was actually lead staff in redoing our rules of procedure. A driving goal in doing that was accessibility and making the process easier for members of the public to participate. And in fact, the reason you're seeing this change here is because we heard from stakeholders about wanting everything in one document and made that change.
Great, thank you for that.
And the last change just on page 11, this is in the Administrative Procedure Act. We are probably the agency that cites this rule the most on evidence. It's kind of allowing certain evidence to come in that might not have been allowed in Superior Court. And since we cite it all the time, we get a little tired of bracketing out the word men and putting the word persons in to make it gender neutral like we do with other documents that we put out there. So we thought we should just get a statutory change on that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Ellen, please join us.
Hello, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So S-112, as it came from the Senate. Do you want a full walkthrough or abbreviated full walkthrough?
To understand the sort of, if you can orient us to this section of statute, what it's doing, and then be thorough.
Sure. I do think this could be considered a housekeeping bill. The changes do relate to remote accessibility and the other PUC procedures. So on page 1 in section 1, section 248A or 248A, section 248 is the first section that's being amended, and there are 2 changes in it. So the first change on page 1 is clearly giving authority for remotely accessible public hearings. And so this section 248 is the certificate of public good section related to gas and electric facilities. So in the middle of the page, with respect to a facility located in the state, in response to a request for one or more members of the public or a party, the Public Utility Commission shall hold a non-evidentiary public hearing on a petition for such a finding and certificate. The public hearing shall either be remotely accessible or held in at least one county in which any portion of the construction of the facility is proposed to be located, or both.
Representative Pat.
Just as I was going to say this earlier, but just to be clear for everybody what is meant by a public hearing in this context, all hearings, I think pretty much any hearing is open to the public, but this is a public hearing is intended for the general public, anyone who's interested, who can come and say what they want about the subject at hand, as opposed to observing a formal proceeding. Because they're all public in the sense that they're not closed door hearings.
Sure. So the next change is on page 3. And so this section is in regards to gas production facilities. And so this is the 120-day waiver. So on page 3, starting on line 3, the commission shall conclude its investigations of a gas production facility within 120 days of issuance of its notice of investigation, or within such shorter period as it deems appropriate, unless the company consents to waive the 120-day requirement, except when the company consents to waive the 120-day requirement. If the commission fails to issue a decision within that 120-day period, the contract or investment shall be deemed approved. So as I think you heard a few moments ago, there is this 120-day time clock on these facilities. And so when the PUC is reviewing these facilities, if they don't make a decision within the 120-day period, it's deemed approved. And so this is allowing the company that's the issue of the investigation to consent to a longer time period.
Members have questions on that? Representative Simmons.
Sorry, so that was phrased differently than what we heard. You said, so the utility can consent to a longer time period?
So yeah, it's the company that's at issue. So there is this 120-day time clock. And so unless they agree to waive the 120 days, it's deemed approved if the decision isn't issued within that period. So this is giving the company the ability to consent to a longer time period.
Why would they do that?
Perhaps if they're in negotiations with permit conditions.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
They could disagree, though. They could choose not to consent.
Yes. So Ways and Means asks if I can come at 2:30.
Yeah, thank you.
So that completes the changes in section 1. So section 2 is in 30 VSA 101. And so this is the regulation of corporations under the Public Utility Commission's jurisdiction. This is adding, clarifying 2 definitions. And so on page 4, subsection B, Unless context clearly requires otherwise, references in this title to a corporation mean and include an individual, partnership, association, corporation, limited liability company, municipality, cooperative, and any other legally recognized entity or person. Unless the context clearly requires otherwise, the references in this title to articles of incorporation mean and include articles of an organization, partnership agreements, or other documentation submitted to the Vermont Secretary of State to register or form a business. Section 3 is 30 VSA 506, and this is in the regulation of cable television section. And so again, related to remote hearings. So on page 5, as part of the renewal proceedings, the commission shall hold a public hearing. The public hearing shall either be remotely accessible or held in each county served pursuant to the certificates that are subject of the renewal proceedings or both. Section 4 is 30 VSA 101, so back to regulation of corporations. So again, in section 4, adding the remote accessible option at the bottom of the page. So down on line 19 through 21, if the department requests, so the Department of Public Service, a hearing on the petition, or if the commission deems a hearing necessary, it shall appoint a time and place either remotely accessible or in the county where the proposed corporation is to have its principal office for hearing the petition. At least 12 days before this hearing, notice of the hearing shall be published on the commission's website and once in a newspaper of general circulation in the county in which the proposed corporation is to have its principal office. The website notice shall be maintained through the date of the hearing. The newspaper notice shall include an internet address where more information regarding the petition may be viewed. And the department, through the Director of Public Advocacy, shall represent the public at the hearing. And so this is for the initial formation of a public service corporation, so something that operates like a utility. The PUC regulates both the initial forming of a public service corporation, which is usually in the form of a utility, but they also regulate the activities separately. So there's multiple kinds of certificates of public good. And so when a company that falls under their jurisdiction is first formed, they get a certificate of public good that is separate from certificate of public good under 248 or 248A. So this is for initial formation of a company.
And do they have, okay, different public notice though for other types of public hearings?
So I do think there are, in 248, there are some very specific types of notice that are provided for in that statute. I don't remember off the top of my head if I think some of the other, so yeah, 248A has its own, and 248 and 248A have specific notice procedures that go with them. I don't remember off the top of my head, like if 231 has a different notice provision.
Or if Kyle could shed light on that.
Sure. So Kyle Landis Marinello, PUC. So this language is modeled after section 231 and section 248. So 231 is another provision like 102 about the permission to operate as a utility in Vermont. And 248 is the provision for building a project that's connected to the grid. So there are additional provisions in there about who gets notice on top of the general notice this year, but this language is referring to the general notice to the public that goes out.
And they're consistent
Yes.
across them. Okay.
Well, with this change, they would be.
Okay. Representative Pat.
A question You had said earlier in your testimony that you noted that less people are reading newspapers because it used to be that needed to be published in two newspapers. I'm wondering whether any thought is given besides the website posting to something like Front Porch Forum, which is read by significant numbers of people in each community.
So like there was some, I'm gleaning that there might have been some conversations about this, or I feel like last year in this committee, we did a lot with this on, can you please remind me where we did a lot?
Yes, you did look at this in regard to the Act 250 statute. It has come up in previous sessions about the changing of technology. I do think many of our statutes broadly still do require a newspaper.
I think in Act 250, we might have eliminated it, but we did define it. It might be interesting to look at that, but
I don't remember. I do think you may have changed about posting on municipal websites and the NRB's website. I don't know I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head, but there have been conversations even prior to that about if there are access issues with eliminating the newspaper requirement. And
yeah,
it's come up in regards to other subjects as well.
we can, we can look into that after this.
So in section 5, 30 VSA 227 is in regards to rate making. And so again, this is allowing a company to consent to waive the requirement. And so at the bottom of page 6, if the commission orders that a change shall not go into effect until final determination of the proceedings, it shall proceed to hear the matter as promptly as possible and shall make its determination within 7 months from the date that it orders the investigation, unless the company consents to waive the 7th month requirement. If the company files for a change in rate design among classes of ratepayers and the company has a rate case pending before the commission shall make its determination on the rate design change within 7 months after the rate case is decided by the commission, unless the company consents to waive the 7-month requirement. Except when the company consents to waive the 7-month requirement, if the commission fails to make its determination within the time period set by the subsection, the changed rate schedules filed by the company shall become effective and final. So again, allowing a utility to consent, they don't have to consent.
I want to be respectful of your need to get to Ways and Means and our kind of upside down schedule today. I think we have you scheduled again on this. I don't know if we'll get to it today or maybe tomorrow morning at 9. We have space, so we'll stay tuned.
Okay.
We got to hear. Thank you. So with that, we're going to do a sort of a similar thing with S137, an act relating to energy efficiency modernization. And ask Kelly Lucci from Efficiency Vermont, I think, to orient us to this. He would join us.
Sure. So Kelly Lucci with Efficiency Vermont. Thanks for inviting me to join you today. I sent along some materials ahead of time. Did the committee members have those?
Up on our webpage.
Not confident that technology won't crash on me, and I want to make sure we get through this because you guys are crunched. So what I will do is just walk through the slide deck I sent if you guys can follow along.
You want to share? Oh, we can follow along.
Does that work? Okay. Keep it simple. So here to talk about S137, which extends the Energy Efficiency Modernization Act, which was passed in 2020. Included a couple slides up front just to orient on who Efficiency Vermont is. So we're the statewide energy efficiency utility, statewide except for Burlington, where Burlington Electric Department manages their own efficiency programs. Have included some information here on what we've achieved over the last 20 years. I'm happy to talk through that, but again, wanting to focus on S137 today, so you have the information you need. The Energy Efficiency Modernization Act was originally passed in 2020. Key provisions: it allows Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric Department to implement programs and services that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal energy and transportation sectors. It allows us to use up to $2 million a year of our existing budgets. So there's no additional funding that's called for to implement these pilots. It requires the work we do to have a nexus with electricity use, recognizing that we're using the energy efficiency charge to fund them. And they have to be additive and complementary to existing programs. So they didn't, rightly so, want us creating anything that would be duplicative of a current state or other program that's out there. And it allowed the pilot to go from 2021 through the end of this year, 2023. So Efficiency Vermont has programs that focus on developing the market for electric vehicles in the state currently. And we also have a pilot program that is supporting installing heat pumps in the homes of low-income customers who've been previously weatherized by the low-income weatherization agencies in the state. So I'll talk a little bit about those programs as I walk through today. S137 basically extends this pilot for an additional 3 years. We can continue the programs that have been successful, but took a little bit of extra time to start up given COVID and some other things that happened over the last few years that added complexity. So just to speak to the current work that we're doing, the electric vehicle dealership program. Again, this is not about providing rebates to customers to support electric vehicles. That would be duplicative of current efforts in the market. This is about developing the supply chain for electric vehicles, helping ensure they're available to consumers and that consumers have the information they need to figure out if they're a good option for them. So under that work, we've developed a network of 51 participating electric vehicle dealerships, including 5 used car dealerships. And we are providing funding and ongoing engagement to help install things like fast charging stations at those facilities and help mechanics get trained on maintenance for electric vehicles, that type of thing.
How are you reaching out to those companies? What's your outreach?
Yeah, so it's very similar to what we do for a lot of our other programs. So for example, when you first started seeing cold climate heat pumps come to the state, we actually worked a lot with manufacturers and then with the distribution network in the state to leverage, we call it our efficiency excellence network. So we create a network with benefits for these dealerships, and I have folks on my team who regularly reach out and engage with these folks. So we'll go out, ensure that they've got the training they need, help them support the point of sale rebates that we offer through a lot of these distributors. For the electric vehicles, we don't offer point of sale rebates, but we do provide them with materials that they can give to their customers to help explain how electric vehicles work. And we might train their sales staff to be able to answer common questions that we're hearing from Vermonters. Do these things work in the winter? That type of thing. So under that, as I said, we've trained 112 sales staff. We have 34 dealers that have accessed program incentives to either install charging stations, access special tools that they need to service electric vehicles, or get their staff trained. And you may also be familiar with the other aspect of this work, which is there's a campaign we do in partnership with Drive Electric Vermont to help raise consumer awareness around electric vehicles, and help again provide information and support to customers as they think about whether electric vehicles are the right choice for them. So moving in to the thermal section of the slides, and I'm obviously happy to come back with any questions you have, but I'm trying to be mindful of your crunch time here. I wanted to talk a little bit about our low-income fuel switch pilot. So our approach in creating these pilots was really to think about what are gaps that exist in the market and how can we help use the pilot to address them. So when Tier 3 under the Renewable Energy Standard was first created, it ended up with sort of a unique agreement between the distribution utilities and Efficiency Vermont around how different savings were claimed and attributed. And what that meant is that there was kind of a gap created where there wasn't anybody out in the market helping to support heating electrification. So the installation of cold climate heat pumps for customers who qualified for low income weatherization. So we thought that that would be a really important place to focus in this pilot. Efficiency Vermont has extensive contracts with the low income weatherization agencies already. We collaborate with them extensively. And we also work very closely with the distribution utilities. So basically, the way this program works is we get referrals from weatherization agencies for customers whose homes have been weatherized over the last 5 years and who meet certain criteria that might indicate that the installation of a heat pump would be good for them. It wouldn't cost extra money, and it would support reducing their heating costs. We then reach out to those customers, qualify for them for the program. We cover the full cost of a heat pump, and we assign a participating contractor to go out and handle the installation. So it's really very plug and play for these customers. They don't have to do anything further than go through our qualification process and allow the contractor to do the work. And then we, through an existing process that we already have, we pay for some of that additional cost, and we bill the utilities for some of the additional cost of making this heat pump available for free for these customers.
Are these typically customers who participated in weatherization?
These are all customers who've gone through the state low-income weatherization program. So they're income qualified and their homes have been weatherized, which means that they get extra credit under Tier 3 because we wanted to encourage that type of activity. So slide 11, the impact of this program so far. Our original goal was to serve about 300 customers. We've got 295 enrolled right now. We have customers in every county in the state. 89% of them are outside of Chittenden County. And we've completed, as of the middle of April, 108 projects. Just of note, we're seeing a lot of electric panel upgrades needed. The project costs have been increasing a little bit more than we originally budgeted because of supply chain issues around the equipment, but the program's running very smoothly, and we currently have 147 customers waitlisted. If this pilot's extended, our intention is to go back in 2024 and serve those customers who are currently on the wait list to make sure that they get support. And let me see. So I'll go to the last slide now, slide 13, sorry, just to highlight some of the changes that were made in the Senate side. So, again, we took the existing legislation and basically looked to extend it 3 years. There were a couple adjustments that were made. So in Section A, the pilot's extended 3 years. We also clarified that the pilot can only continue if efficiency utility budgets rise no faster than inflation, because again, we're using this from our existing budget. There's no additional funding appropriated, but we're not intending to seek additional funding for this either. We have to find room for it. It also allows us to account for the extension of these pilots as we're thinking about planning for our next 3-year period. So the legislature would need to extend the pilots again, but we can at least produce different scenarios from our budgets and work with regulators collaboratively ahead of time, regardless of whether that happens, and just plan adequately. Section B5 allowed for more flexibility for us under that low-income fuel switch program I just spoke about. There's a requirement in place around making sure that we serve customers of each distribution utility proportional to the amount of energy efficiency charge that they contribute. And that was making it a little bit challenging for us to coordinate with utilities around budgets. This allows us to consider this as a statewide program and treat it a little bit more flexibly, which should help us address that wait list. And then the final sections, B and F, these are some BED, Burlington Electric Department specific provisions that I'll let them speak to. But just to note up front, those changes do not apply to Efficiency Vermont pilots at all.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Do members have questions? Representative Pat.
I know this, you talked about how directly involved the electric utilities are in this, but is there a reason in terms of heating technology that it's limited to cold climate heat pumps as opposed to advanced wood heat?
There's a requirement in the pilots or in the original legislation that have a nexus with electricity usage. So the nexus is a little bit cleaner, but there is a small amount of electric usage with, for example, a pellet stove. But we tended to go towards measures that were a focus of the utilities under tier 3, because they're being asked to chip in extra funds to support these projects as well.
The reason I'm asking is because in not every case is that the best choice for people. So that I'm just concerned people are being steered to a choice that isn't necessarily in their particular situation.
It's a really important point. And what I will say is we have a pretty robust qualification process. So we have certain criteria that we ask the weatherization agencies to look at when they look at the customers they've served over the last 5 years, to kind of do a pre-screen and say who might be a good candidate for a cold climate heat pump. And then we do a pretty robust additional screening process when those customers follow up with us, to the point of actually modeling for them what the likely impact is on their costs, so that they can hear that and opt in because they feel like it's the best choice for them. But it is a really important point.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have limited time with our legislative council. I just want to let you know I'm going to try to do the walkthrough before she has to go. Representative Morris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there any consideration or thoughts around any increased electrical rates to the customers after installation?
Electric rates or electric bills?
Electric bills.
Okay. So we definitely screen very closely for that. So the idea is that if there is an increase in their electric bill, it's being significantly offset by a decrease in either their fossil fuel costs, or I'll give you an example. One of the customers we served was, she didn't want to use her oil boiler, and she had 6 electric space heaters running. So she's going to see a decrease in her electric costs as a result of installing a heat pump. But we look very carefully to make sure that this is not going to increase costs for those customers. Or if it is, that they're fully aware of that and they feel like the other benefits of the technology are worth that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Is there a question?
It's just to clarify, if someone uses electricity as their primary form of heat, they can get light heat support.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Right, we are going to invite our legislative counsel, Becky Wasserman, to join us. She's got a time limitation. Yeah.
Enough.
Welcome.
Afternoon, Becky Wasserman, Legislative Council. I understand you wanted to talk about a specific section of Act 172, but I don't know if you want more details on the act itself.
I get it. I was ahead. I'm really sorry. I thought you were here to, I forgot, Ellen's walking us through this.
S 137.
However, can we do gymnastics with Becky right now? Or should we have her come back?
Gymnastics. We could, we're in the middle. This is.
I can also come back, whatever.
We don't have TJ here.
Yeah. Okay. Should we stick with what we were doing? 137.
Are you here till 3?
Yes, but so are we. We're done at 3. We have to go to the floor at 3.
So I would say we should hear from Darren.
Yeah.
And finish this. Is anybody here from, Melissa is here.
Yeah, Melissa's here.
Just popped out. For
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So maybe we'll reschedule you for the month.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was
That's totally fine.
being jumbled.
Thank you.
This might be super fast.
Oh. All right, maybe you can stay till 3 if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You may-
Okay,
Is that, if it doesn't work
I do have another committee asking if I could be there as soon
now.
as I can.
Oh, okay,
so-
you should go do that.
But if I can, do you want me to coordinate staying or?
Oh dear, this is getting very convoluted. What is this change?
This is very small. It's Act 172.
Let's just,
Yeah.
why don't we just finish? I'm sorry, everyone. The session.
Okay. So Act 172 is relating, it's an act relating to the municipal energy resilience initiatives. And so this was passed last year. Just as a reminder, this bill created an assessment process of municipal buildings and facilities that applied to have their buildings assessed for energy resilience. It also created a grant program that's administered by BGS in coordination with Efficiency Vermont. And then finally, there was a loan program that was created, the Municipal Energy Loan Program, and that is modeled similar to the state energy loan program, where BGS is providing financing to municipalities for equipment replacement, studies, weatherization, construction of improvements affecting the use of energy resources, and implementation of energy efficiency and conservation measures and the use of renewable resources. And the way this program is funded is through a municipal energy revolving fund, which is also maintained by BGS. And the language that I'm here to talk about is in section 8 of the bill on page 11, which had in FY23 2 pots of money from the IIJA that were coming to the Department of Public Service.
Excuse me, what bill are you looking at?
Oh, Act 172.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I said bill, so I was confused.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Last year's bill, okay.
It was enacted last year. So there was the funding that went into the municipal revolving energy revolving fund was an appropriation that was transferred to BGS from the Department of Public Service, and there were 2 pots of money that were coming to the state from the IIJA. Sorry. So the first was 800,000 from the Energy Efficiency Revolving Loan Fund Capitalization Grant that was allocated from the IIJA, and then not more than 2 million from the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Block Grant Fund from the IIJA. And at the time the bill passed last year, these funds hadn't been actually sent to the state yet. So there was language asking that the Department of Public Service report to this committee and Senate Finance on the total amounts approved by the state that were grant amounts approved by the state and transferred into that fund. And so I think the issue here is has to do with the limits that on what those funds can be used for that were not known at the time that this bill passed. So it's a pot of $2.8 million that's split up from 2 different allocations that came to the state from the IIJA.
Right, and we did learn about this. So adjustment or budget adjustment. Yeah. So. Representative Simmons.
So what is the proposal for this year?
I think we're about to hear that.
Okay.
I didn't know if there were any kind of legal concerns that you want to share with us about this proposed change. I mean, it's just you could say what it is one more time, and then we'll ask you.
I'm actually not sure that I know all the set proposed change yet.
But you summarized it. It's just a change in the way that.
Yeah, I think there's a limit on how some of the funds can be used. So the idea is rather than appropriating it into the loan fund, the proposal would be to use these funds for the grant program instead that I mentioned that was set up in the other part of the bill. So the bill was the grant program and the loan program. And so I think a certain percentage of the dollars have to be used for the grant program to be to comply with the federal requirements.
And can you foresee any challenges for us in doing that?
I think the only challenges might be administrative for BGS in terms of how, I don't know where they are in sort of awarding grants. And so I think maybe they would need to speak to having sort of an influx of money coming in, what that means for their their grant award process. And the only other thing, which I know that the ARPA funds that were funding the grant program had a timeline in which they had to be used by. So I would just need to check if there's a limit on the time in which the IIJA money has to be used.
ARPA and this being rural, not rural.
Oh, right. They did switch this.
What is the flavor?
So when the bill passed, it was a certain pot of ARPA dollars, and I think for the summer it was determined that it had to come from the revenue loss pot of.
Flexible.
Yeah, it was more flexible. So I think just the timing of when the dollars have to be used in the grant program might be an issue to look into as well.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Happy to come back if there are more questions.
There may be. Thanks. We're bouncing around a little. And we're going to bounce back to 137 with Darren Springer.
I never read it, so.
Hi, good afternoon. Darren Springer, General Manager, Burlington Electric. I'm joined by my colleague, Chris Burns, who runs our energy efficiency programs. I am conscious of the committee's time, so I'm going to, I'll share my screen if it's helpful, but I will be very quick with our slides. And I think Kelly Lucci touched on a number of the benefits of S137 as an efficiency utility here in Burlington. We've been a part of this program as well. I'm going to skip right to some of our Act 151 or S137 programs, as we should call it now. We've been helping our customers with heat pumps, with electric vehicles, with EV charging, including multifamily building EV charging. We have also been helping with geothermal test wells, and that's one of the great examples I think of this program is there's no other program that we have access to for our customers through any other incentive program or state program that helps with drilling a geothermal test well. And we've had some successful applications for that through this Act 151 S137 program. Great example being that the Burlington High School, the new high school, had a successful geothermal test well, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to help them implement a geothermal heating and cooling system for that new campus. So this is really an underrated climate program here that's contained in this pilot that we hope to continue. I will skip ahead to, this is our projections for how many additional customers can take advantage of some of our incentive programs with the Act 151 funds included. You can see we're able to boost our heat pump participation, significantly boost multifamily EV charging, help more customers access plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles as examples of how we're utilizing the funds for this program. And I will skip right to the end here and just note that the things that we really appreciate about this is it does fill gaps that other programs do not currently address. We have tier 3 incentive programs, but with geothermal, for example, we can fund the geothermal system, but not the test well. So Act 151, S137 helps in that regard. It's a very flexible program. We can respond to market conditions. We can change allocations within the program. And as Kelly mentioned, there are some provisions in the bill before you that will help ensure that BED and our customers continue to access our thermal energy and process fuel funds and can use some of those funds to help design programs that really help our most energy burdened customers reduce their fossil fuel use. So we're excited about that new provision in the bill. We worked on that with VPIRG and other partners. And I will stop sharing my screen. I hope I was quick, knowing that you have a 3 o'clock deadline there, but I'm glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Members have questions. Representative Sibilia.
I do not. I'm just wondering about, we have this warrant for possible vote Thursday.
Yeah. I don't know. Why does it matter?
I'm just wondering about our time frame for
We have
this. Any.
Members have questions for Mr. Springer? Not seeing any. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Next, we have Melissa Bailey, Department of Public Service. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Melissa Bailey, Director of Efficiency and Energy Resources for the Department of Public Service. So I know we're tight on time. You want me to just quickly touch on S-137 and then close out on the 172 piece? Sorry.
Let's do, yes, 37 first and see how, or where we're at.
Okay, sure. I can be pretty quick. I do have some written comments. I'll just pass around. These should be on the website as well. The date is wrong because they were adopted from the Senate version. Apologies. So just to quickly summarize, department is not opposed to the Act 151 extension envisioned under S-137. Our position, we maintain that the electric energy efficiency charge is not the most appropriate funding mechanism to accomplish decarbonization in the thermal and transportation sectors. That's probably a message that you'll continue to hear from the department. And the concern there, of course, is that increasing costs in the electric sector undermine electrification, which is a cornerstone of our climate policy statewide. So we keep focus on keeping electric sector costs as low as possible as we continue this transition to electricity as the fuel source for heating and transportation. Again, we're engaged with conversations with the energy efficiency utilities and the distribution utilities, and we're really asking that they keep laser focused on electric system costs as we look forward to a future in which load is much higher than it is today. Given that concern, that's an overarching concern of the department, because we have seen slow progress in these two sectors. We are not opposed to another 3-year limited continuation of the Act 151 activities that you have just heard about from BED and EVT. Our concerns were mainly addressed on the Senate side. We want to make sure that there are safeguards maintained in the bill, which there are. Those major safeguards are that these activities have to be conducted under a flat budget. So that ensures that we will not see significant energy efficiency charge increases in order to fund these activities. Flat budget adjusted for inflation, I believe, is how the bill is written. And another primary safeguard is that this is, again, a limited duration, a 3-year duration continuation of these activities. The energy landscape is changing really quickly. We're seeing policy proposals in the thermal sector. We're seeing the advanced clean cars rule in the transportation sector. So things are changing quickly. And again, we're not supportive of a long-term use of energy efficiency charge funds to, again, to continue to tackle emissions in those two sectors. But the way that this pilot has been built and is envisioned under S-137, we're not opposed to that short-term continuation. And again, the way that we look at these proposals, right, is, of course, the work the efficiency utilities is doing is valuable in this sector, no doubt. The way the department approaches these policy considerations is really about what are the trade-offs. And if we're enabling $2 million a year of the efficiency utilities budget to be deployed for these purposes, then what are we giving up on the other side? What are the other cost-effective electric efficiency measures that are foregone because we're investing in greenhouse gas emissions? And again, I think that that conversation will happen at the PUC when the EEUs file their proposals for the coming 3-year period. So again, and yeah, I mentioned policy options in the thermal sector and the transportation sector. Again, we look at what are the other potential funding sources that there could be to achieve this work. So again, with the example of the clean cars rule, that really obligates manufacturers to move the EV market, to move the zero emission vehicle market. And we don't want ratepayer dollars to supplant those investments that really should be made by manufacturers. So again, coming full circle, it's really, our concern is really about relying on the EEC to holistically fund decarbonization and concerns that will increase electric system costs and be counterproductive to our end goal of relying on electricity. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm curious, can you give me some examples of what we might be giving up?
So that's something that we will be looking at. So we're currently in the 3-year budget setting period for the 2 efficiency utilities. But I think it would look like lower investment in kind of traditional electric efficiency measures. So that means efficient appliances, like a more efficient refrigerator or more efficient industrial equipment in a commercial facility. It essentially, when I say traditional electric efficiency, I mean within the electric sector. So they lower electric demand, they lower peak related electric costs and depress costs in the electric sector. Essentially reducing electric load. So we're in this interesting transition where we're having our efficiency utilities continue to do demand side activities that lower electric load, while at the same time, we're encouraging electrification strategically of other of heating and transportation loads. So we're potentially foregoing $2 million a year worth of, or a little bit more when you take both the EUs of that traditional work to lower electric system costs.
Representative Sibilia.
I just wanted to make sure I was clear. I think you said you support, the department supports 137.
We're neutral on this bill.
Mayor doesn't oppose.
But we do not oppose. And it's really about the devils are in the details, right? I mean, this lays out a structure which is, I think, permissive for the EUs to undertake these activities. It doesn't require them. And so again, without a concrete proposal and that conversation about trade-offs, it's difficult to be supportive. I mean, I'm comfortable saying we're supportive of the option that's envisioned in S137.
You have a question?
No.
Okay. I think we're right up against 3 o'clock. Would you be able to join us tomorrow morning if we have the need for that?
On Act 172,
Yeah.
I can give 60 seconds right now. Essentially, we're no longer proposing a language change after further conversations with building and general services. So that's why I was trying to do this. While Ledge Council was talking, I think she framed the issue well, but because essentially what we need to report to the committee is that there's essentially roughly $900,000 from the Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Grant that was envisioned to go into the loan program that cannot go to the loan program.
Because of its source of the dollar.
Because of DOE requirements. They're saying these block grant funds cannot be used for loans. They need to be directly granted to municipalities. And because we don't have all of the information on program guidelines and program restrictions, I don't think Buildings and General Services is comfortable being required to accept those funds into the Municipal Energy Resilience Program under Act 172. So we're not seeking that legislative directive for them to receive the funds. They're concerned about whether those funds would mesh well with their program. So those funds could end up staying with the Department of Public Service, or we could end up subgranting them to BGS under an MOU. I don't believe we need legislative change. So these conversations are evolving. We're evolving today throughout the day, but at this point we would not be looking for legislative change.
Okay, good.
Just notice there's just less in that revolving loan fund than was envisioned.
Can you just say that high level $900,000 is, I said, where the money is? Where is it now? That's.
Yeah, sorry. So Vermont will get 1.5 million under this Energy Efficiency Conservation Block Group grant, and 60% of it, which is the roughly 900,000, needs to be subgranted to municipalities. And I'd be happy to put this in a memo, which leaves 600,000 of that can go to the revolving loan fund as envisioned. So the revolving loan fund was envisioned as up to 2.8 million, and the balance now would be like 1.3 million. So it's a considerably smaller revolving loan fund, but potentially more money available as grants. I'd be happy to put those numbers in a memo. Yeah.
Great. Thank you
for all the confusion on that one.
Thank you.
But it saves you some time.
You made it simpler at the
Yeah.
end. So thank you. All right, members, we are due on the floor, and we'll be back in committee tomorrow morning at 9. Stay tuned. We're adjourned for the day.